Picture yourself in the year 1200, sitting on a wooden stool at the head of a stone bridge, a small leather pouch at your belt, watching the merchants, the pilgrims, and the farmers with their bouncing carts, and every single one of them must pay you to cross. You smile, a few coins from every traveler day after day. Surely this is the easiest money there is. But here is the truth that nobody expects. Owning a toll bridge in the Middle Ages was one of the most expensive, fragile, and least reliable businesses a person could possibly run, and by the time you hear the whole story, you will be very glad you never had to try it. So let us start with the big idea because most people get the whole thing backwards. A toll bridge in the Middle Ages was not a money machine. It was a public utility that happened to charge a fee. And more often than not, it was built by a town, a lord, a monastery, or a charity, not by a businessman hoping to get rich. The bridge was one of the most important pieces of infrastructure a community could own because a river that could not be crossed meant no trade, no markets, no pilgrims, no travelers, and no food. So the bridge was treated like a sacred civic duty. And that is why so many medieval bridges were built by religious brotherhoods and paid for by donations. And the church treated the bridge as a work of charity and even gave a special blessing to the bridge builders. And before we talk about profit, we have to talk about cost, because the cost is the whole story. And the cost is also the reason that almost nobody ever built a toll bridge just to get rich. So keep that in your mind, because everything I tell you from here leads to that one simple conclusion. Let me give you a way to understand medieval money, because a single penny will not mean much to you until you know what it bought. In 13th century England, a common laborer working on a building site earned about 2 pennies for a full day of heavy work, a skilled mason or a carpenter. The kind of craftsman who actually built a bridge earned about 3 pennies a day. And with a single penny you could buy a loaf of bread. So a penny is not pocket change. It is roughly half a day of work for an ordinary man. And a shilling, which is 12 pennies, is about 6 days of work, and a pound, which is 20 shillings, or 240 pennies, is about 120 days of work. And to make the scale even clearer, a good workhorse could cost you a pound or more, which is 120 days of work standing in your stable, and a cow cost about half a pound, and a cart a few shillings, and a pair of shoes a few pennies. So now you have a real ruler, and you can measure every price I mention against it. And I am going to keep using this ruler because once you see how many days of work a bridge eats, you will understand why nobody built one lightly, and why the people who did build one were rarely the ones who got rich. Now let us talk about the cost of building, and this is where the myth really dies. A stone bridge is not a hut. It is an engineering project that needs quarried stone, burned lime for mortar, huge timbers for scaffolding and for the foundations, iron for the clamps and the tools, and hundreds of skilled workers toiling for years. And here is the thing. The wages alone were staggering. If a mason earns 3 pennies a day, then a crew of 50 masons for a single year costs more than £50 before you even buy one stone. And a major bridge took more than a dozen masons, plus carpenters, plus laborers, plus the quarrymen cutting the stone. And it took years, not months. And the work was slow for a reason, because the masons had to set every stone by hand, and every arch had to be balanced so that it would not fall when the wooden frame was pulled away. And there was no machine to help, only muscle and rope, and the patience of a craftsman who earned 3 pennies a day. Let me make this concrete with the most famous example in the English-speaking world, the old London Bridge, the one with the houses and the shops on top of it. Work began in the year 1176, and it was not finished until 1209. That is 33 years of work, and it was funded by a special tax imposed by the king, by the tolls collected during construction, and by donations, and the total cost was enormous. We do not have a perfect bill, but we know it ran into many thousands of pounds. And to make that real, think of £1,000. £1,000 is 240,000 pennies, and at 2 pennies a day for a laborer, £1,000 is 120,000 working days, which is more than 300 years of a single man's labor. So even a modest stone bridge, costing a few £100s, was a project that could absorb the entire working life of a whole village. And that is why so many bridges were built slowly, over decades, and funded by everyone in the community together, and why the builders were not a single rich man but often a whole town, a guild, or a brotherhood. The price of the materials was just as painful. A block of good building stone had to be quarried, shaped, and hauled to the river, often by ox cart over rough roads. and the stone was only half the story. The mortar that held the bridge together was made from lime, which meant burning limestone in a kiln for days, and the lime was mixed with sand and water on site, and every arch needed a wooden frame, called a centering, to hold the stones up while the mortar dried, and those timber frames were enormous, and at the end of the project the timber was often thrown away or burned. So a bridge consumed timber like a forest, and the timber had to be bought, cut, and hauled, and the iron, the clamps, and the pins that held the stone together had to be forged by a blacksmith, and a blacksmith's work was expensive, and every single one of those costs, stone, lime, timber, iron, and labor, was measured in the same pennies that a laborer earned in a day. So when you add it all up, you start to see why a bridge was the most expensive thing a medieval community could build, after a cathedral, and sometimes even that. And the foundations were the hardest part because the piers had to be sunk into the riverbed, and the workmen had to build the stone walls in the middle of moving water. And they did this by building a cofferdam, a temporary circular wall of timber and earth, then pumping the water out, and then digging down to solid ground. And this was slow, dangerous, and endlessly expensive, because every year the river could wash the cofferdam away and the work would have to start again. And there is a second cost that surprises people: the ground. You cannot just build a bridge anywhere. You need a place where the stone piers can be sunk into the riverbed, and where the river is not too wide or too fast, and in many towns, the right to build a bridge and the right to collect the tolls had to be granted by the king or by the local lord, and that grant, called a pontage, was not free, and it was not forever. A pontage was often given for a limited number of years, say 3 or 5, specifically to repair a bridge. And when the years ran out, the right to collect tolls ran out with it. So even the legal permission to run your toll bridge was a temporary, renewed, and sometimes revoked privilege. And if the lord or the king changed their mind or decided to take the tolls for themselves, your business could be over in a single season, and you could not even take the bridge with you because the bridge sat on the Lord's land over the Lord's river, and the Lord owned the crossing whether you built it or not. Now here is a question you might be asking, and it is a fair one. If the tolls were so small and the costs so huge, why did anyone ever build a toll bridge at all? And the answer is that most of them were not built for the tolls. They were built because the crossing was needed, and the toll was simply a way to keep the bridge alive, and the people who lent the money, or gave the land, or donated the stone, did not expect a profit. They expected a bridge. And for a town, the bridge repaid itself in ways that never showed up in a ledger, because a town with a bridge could tax the trade that crossed it, and the market that grew at the end of the bridge paid the town in market tolls, and the shops that lined the bridge paid the town rent, and the pilgrims who crossed the bridge spent their money in the town's inns. So the bridge paid for itself indirectly through the life it brought to the town, not through the pennies at the gate, and that is the real accounting. And it is the reason the towns kept the tolls low, because the toll was not the business. The town was the business, and the bridge was the engine that made the town run. Now, after the bridge is standing, the costs do not stop. They get worse because a stone bridge is a machine that is constantly trying to fall apart. The river is the enemy. Every flood pushes against the piers. Every winter, freeze can crack the masonry. Floating ice can smash into the arches, and the current slowly scours away the riverbed under the foundations. So a bridge needs a standing crew of masons and laborers, working every year, patching, repointing, and replacing. And it needs a steady supply of timber for the scaffolding and lime for the mortar. And this is the brutal truth. The repair bills never end. And for a bridge that sees heavy traffic, the maintenance cost year after year could eat a huge share of everything the tolls brought in. And let me translate that. A single repair job, say rebuilding one damaged arch, might cost a mason 50 days of work just to do the skilled labor, plus the stone, the lime, and the timber. So one arch could cost the equivalent of 100 or 200 working days, and a bad flood could damage several arches at once, so a single bad winter could wipe out a year of toll income. And in many documented cases, the tolls simply could not keep up, and the town had to beg for a new pontage or take up a special collection or sell the bridge to someone else. And the bridge wardens, the men in charge of the money, spent their lives this way, gathering pennies and then watching them all vanish into a single pile of new stone. And there is a cheaper alternative that also shows the problem: the timber bridge. A wooden bridge was far cheaper to build because wood was cheaper than cut stone, and a smaller crew could raise it in a season. But a wooden bridge rotted, and it rotted fast, and it buckled under heavy carts, and it washed away in floods, and it burned. And so a timber bridge lasted only a few years, while a stone bridge, if it was maintained, could last centuries. And so the community had a choice: pay a fortune once and then pay for repairs forever, or pay a little now and replace the whole bridge again and again. And in real life, most communities built timber bridges first and only built the stone bridge they truly needed when the timber bridges kept collapsing. And this is the real economics. The cheap option was the expensive one in the long run, and the expensive option was the cheap one, but only if you could survive the first enormous bill. Let me tell you about the true owners of these bridges, because they make the economics clear. In Avignon, in the south of France, there is the famous Pont Saint Bénézet, the one with the chapel on it. And it was begun in the late 1170s by a shepherd named Bénézet. And it was built not by a merchant hoping to profit, but by a religious brotherhood, the Fraternity of the Pontiffs. And these brothers collected alms, and they built bridges as an act of faith. And they did not expect the bridge to make them rich. They expected to spend, and they did. And the great bridges of England were often owned and maintained by the town itself, or by a dedicated trust. The City of London held the London Bridge, and the rents and the tolls were collected by bridge wardens, and the money was spent on the bridge, not pocketed. And the Rochester Bridge in Kent was paid for by two wealthy patrons, Sir John de Cobham and Sir Robert Knowles, who endowed it with land, so that the rents from that land would pay for the bridge forever. And that is the key. The smartest medieval bridge owners did not bet on the tolls alone. They bet on an estate, a bundle of land and rents that would produce income every year, no matter how many travelers crossed. And the tolls were just a small part of the picture. And the bridge itself usually had a gatehouse, a stone tower at each end, and a chapel. And the gatehouse was where the toll collector sat, and the chapel was where the bridge chaplain prayed. And both of those were paid for out of the same fund. And even the chapel had to be maintained, and its bells repaired and its priest fed, so the little world of the bridge had its own full set of costs. So where did the money actually come from? Let us count the sources, because there were more of them than you might think. First, of course, the tolls, and these were not a simple flat fee. A pedestrian with no goods might pay nothing, or a halfpenny. A loaded cart paid more. A drove of livestock paid per animal, and a boat passing under the bridge paid a fee, and every toll was a fraction of a penny up to a few pennies. And I want you to see what that means. In days of work, a halfpenny toll is a quarter of a day of a laborer's work, a penny is half a day, and a two-penny toll is a full day's work, so even a small toll was a real cost to a working person, which is why many towns let the poor cross for free, and why the tolls were never, by themselves, the road to riches. And the tolls were often rented out. The town would lease the right to collect the tolls to a single man, HEE, toll farmer, who paid the town a fixed sum in advance, and then kept whatever he could collect. And this was a gamble for the toll farmer because if the traffic was light, or the bridge broke, or the king changed the rules, he lost his money. And the town, in turn, got a fixed, reliable income and passed the risk of the river onto someone else. So both the town and the toll farmer were playing the same game, betting that the bridge would earn more than it cost, and sometimes they lost. And the tolls were also a quiet form of trade tax because the toll was charged on the goods, not just on the person. So a cart of grain, a drove of sheep, a barrel of wine, or a bale of cloth all paid a little more. And this meant the bridge collected a tiny share of every bit of commerce that passed. And over a year, with carts and herds and boats coming through every day, all those tiny shares added up into a real, if modest, income. But even then, the tolls on a busy bridge were still counted in the low hundreds of pennies a year, not in pounds. And 100 pennies is only 50 days of labor, so even a very busy bridge brought in, at best, the yearly wage of a handful of workers, and the masons who rebuilt the arches earned that same money back in a single season. Second, there were the rents. And this was the clever part, because a bridge was a place where people had to pass, so it was a prime spot for shops. On the old London Bridge and on the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, people built houses and shops right on the bridge, and the rent from those shops was far more reliable than the tolls, because a shop pays rent every quarter, whether the river floods or not. And a shop on a busy bridge could rent for much more than a shop in a quiet street, because every traveler walked past its door. And when the bridge was crowded, the rent went up, and the shopkeepers were packed in, and the bridge itself became a little street, and that rent was the steady money. And it is the reasons. The London Bridge was able to pay for its own repairs for centuries. Third, there were the donations, and these were enormous. People gave money to bridges in their wills, and they gave money in life, and the church offered a powerful incentive, an indulgence, which meant that a person who gave generously to a bridge could receive a written pardon, reducing their time in purgatory. And this was a genuine, documented, and massively effective fundraising tool, because people were willing to give a lot of money to save a bridge and to save their own soul. And the bridge became a named charity, and people could bequeath a bridge a cow, or a field, or a rent, or a lump sum, and all of it was recorded in the bridge accounts. And fourth, there were the endowments, the land that the bridge owned, and the rents from that land, and the mills because several bridges owned watermills in the river, and the millers paid the bridge a share of their earnings, and the fishing rights, and the rights to the water, all of it flowed into the bridge fund. So the smart owners were not begging for pennies at the toll gate. They were landlords, with a portfolio of rents, mills, and land, and the tolls were just the icing on the cake. Now let me tell you the part that nobody talks about, the things that could ruin a bridge owner, and there were many. And the first is the obvious one, the river. A medieval bridge was built to be a compromise. If the piers were close together, the arches were strong, but the river flowed fast and the current was dangerous. If the piers were far apart, the arches were wide and the river was gentle, but the span was weak, and the bridge builders had to guess, and sometimes they guessed wrong. And the river took the bridge. The London Bridge of the 12th century had a serious problem. The piers were so close that the river rushed through the narrow gaps, and the water was so violent that it was dangerous for boats, and the bridge itself was battered by the current every single day, and the maintenance was constant, and a bridge that was badly designed could be gnawed to pieces within a few decades, and the repair bills would be endless. And this is a documented fate, not a rumor. The second danger was the weather. A bad flood could scour out the foundations, a hard freeze could crack the stone, and there were recorded cases of bridges being destroyed by ice and by flood. And the owner found themselves with no bridge, no tolls, and a huge rebuild bill, and there was no insurance, no one to call. And the third danger was neglect. And this sounds odd, but it is real, because the tolls were often granted for a limited number of years, and when the years ran out, the collecting stopped and the maintenance stopped with it. And a bridge that was not maintained for a few years began to rot, and the stone crumbled, and the mortar washed out, and the whole thing became a ruin. And this is why so many medieval bridges were abandoned, not because the people were poor, but because the economics did not work, the tolls were not enough to cover the endless repair, and the community gave up. The fourth danger was conflict, and I do not mean battles. I mean the everyday fights over money. Everyone wanted a share of the tolls. The king wanted them, the lord wanted them, the town wanted them, the church wanted them, and the merchant who had paid to build the bridge wanted them back. And there were endless legal fights over who had the right to collect, and over what the toll should be, and over whether the bridge could even charge at all, and a legal fight could cost more than the bridge was worth, and a bridge owner could spend years in court and end up with nothing. And the fifth danger was the changing road. And this is the sneakiest one, because a bridge only makes money if people cross it, and if the main road moved, if a new ferry appeared, if a rival bridge opened upstream, or if the trade simply shifted away, then the traffic dried up, and the tolls dried up with it, and you were left with a huge, expensive stone monument that nobody used. And this happened, and it ruined owners, because a toll bridge is a hostage to traffic, and the owner has no control over the traffic. And the sixth danger, and this one is the most important, is the gap between the cost and the fee, because the tolls were set low, on purpose, by the people who owned the bridge. And the reason is that the bridge was a public good, and the town did not want to starve its own farmers and merchants by charging them too much to cross their own river. So the tolls were kept low, low enough that a poor farmer could still bring his grain to market, and that meant the tolls could never, ever pay for the bridge, not the construction, not the maintenance. And this is the single most important fact about the economics of a medieval toll bridge. The tolls were never meant to be the main income. They were a small supplementary fee, and the real money and the real cost was in the rents, the endowments, the donations, and the endless river of repairs. So the person who imagined a toll bridge as a cash cow had the whole picture backwards. The toll bridge was a burden, shouldered by the community, and the tolls were just a way to make the burden slightly lighter. So let me give you the honest summary, because this is the part that sticks. First, the tolls were small. A half penny to a few pennies, always measured in fractions of a day of work, and never enough to pay for the bridge. Second, the costs were enormous. And the moment you translate £1,000 into 120,000 working days, you realize that a bridge was one of the most expensive things a medieval society could build. Third, the smart owners did not rely on tolls. They relied on rents, on land, on mills, on donations, and on the endless patience of the masons. Fourth, the maintenance was a bottomless pit, and a single flood or freeze could erase a year of income. And fifth, the owners were not fat merchants counting coins. They were usually towns, monasteries, trusts, and charitable brothers. And the bridge was a community project, not a private fortune. And here is the real final truth. Owning a medieval toll bridge was not a way to get rich. It was a way to be poor. Very slowly, with great dignity, and in full view of everyone, the people who built the great bridges did not do it to make money. They did it because a bridge was worth more than money. Because a bridge meant that a town could trade, and a family could visit, and a farmer could reach the market, and a pilgrim could reach the shrine. And the toll booth was never the point. The bridge was the point. And the toll was just the small price that the community paid, in the same pennies that a laborer earned in a day, to keep the one thing that made the whole town richer than any coin. So the next time you cross a bridge and grumble about the toll, remember the mason who earned 3 pennies a day and the 40 years of his craft, and the 300 years of a single man's labor that went into the stone under your feet, and you will understand. The toll was never the business. The bridge was the business, and the toll was just the last, smallest, and most honest part of the whole story.